If you were to rank the top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL, Carson Wentz is somebody that you always had to mention. Before he was injured during his 2017 season, many, including myself, thought he had a very good shot at winning the league's MVP. That season was one of the best I've seen, and he was playing so incredibly well in Doug Peterson's offense. Well, after they won the Super Bowl, things just weren't the same the following 2 years. Sure, the Eagles have been competitive making the playoffs in both seasons, but this team just hasn't been as strong. This year, things have taken a complete nosedive. In the first 3 games of the season, the Eagles are 0-2-1, and this offense just hasn't found any sort of rhythm. For this video, I wanted to answer the following question. What is happening in Philly? Is it scheme? Is it all the injuries? Is it poor planning? Or is it another factor that is holding them back? After going through the film in detail, I came to one final conclusion. Carson Wentz is the big problem for the Eagles. Yes, there are definitely other factors that we'll talk about in this breakdown, but his play has been awful over the past few weeks. We need to call that out. Based on my tracking as I went through his film this season, there were so many plays where Wentz just simply didn't trust his own receivers. He had opportunities to rip the ball into open windows, but he decided to hold on to it instead of fully seeing the field. Take the 2nd and 10 against the Bengals in Week 3. This play came at the start of the second quarter. The Eagles were up 3-0, and honestly both teams were playing pretty awful in this game so far. Before the snap, the Eagles motioned Greg Ward Jr. across the formation in order to get an indication of the Bengals' coverage. After seeing the first cornerback trail, this was an indicator that Cincinnati was likely playing man. However, that's not what they ended up running here. They were actually in cover 2. Cover 2 is a zone defense made up of 2 deep safeties with 5 underneath zones. The underneath and outside defenders will jam and sink against the receivers, while the interior 3 will sit in the seams and hooks over the middle of the defense. Against cover 2, there are a variety of ways that an offense can create openings. For example, passes up the sidelines or between the 2 half-field safeties are usually a good call. Another way to aggressively attack this defense is by using high-low combinations over the middle of the field. That's what the Eagles attempted to do on this one. For this play, the first read starts with the out and up by the sideline, followed by the flat route by the slot receiver. Next, the third read is the over route run by the tight end. Finally, if none of these options are open, Wentz can move on to his check down, which is the running back coming out of the backfield. Let's see what happened here. Wentz first looked to his left to check if the out and up or the flat route had a clear chance for a throw. He correctly identified that both these receivers were covered, so he moved on to his third read. It's at this point in this play where I think Wentz made a mistake. Instead of patiently anticipating that the over route might find space between zones, he quickly moved on to his check down. If you notice where I paused the tape, that the exact moment where he started to throw to his running back, he actually had a clear opening to Zach Ertz. His tight end just cleared the middle hook linebacker, who clearly had his hips flipped in the opposite direction. This is a perfect window for a throw. If Wentz threw the ball at the hash in the 45-yard line, this could have been a 15-yard completion. Instead, Wentz threw a flat-footed pass to his running back. Not only was this not the correct throw, his pass was also too high. His inaccuracy forced the running back to jump in place, and it took away any possibility of yards after the catch. He was then tackled for 3 yards in this one. Now, I picked this play for a variety of reasons. This isn't an ugly interception or a play where I thought Wentz simply made a terrible mistake. This is a play that every single quarterback should make in the NFL. There shouldn't be a question about it. Throwing with anticipation after moving from your pre-snap to post-snap read is extremely important for a quarterback. This issue kept coming up as I went through his film. On top of that, at the very least, Wentz should have thrown a more catchable pass. It was extremely infuriating to watch as Wentz consistently left yards and points off the field. Based on my tracking, he actually had plenty of opportunities that Doug Peterson schemed for, but he simply couldn't execute. This is one of the biggest problems that the Eagles currently face. Now, a moment ago, I mentioned inaccuracy, and this was also a huge problem as I went through his film. Missing receivers, high, low, and behind was all too common for Wentz. Not only that, but even on short passes by the line of scrimmage, he just made it a lot more difficult for his receivers. He forced them to adjust, which eliminated any benefit of the yards that he could possibly create. According to my tracking, one of the root causes of this issue is his footwork. It's been a complete mess all season. His feet aren't connected to his arm, and his hips are completely out of line as he goes through his motion. What happens is that Wentz overstrides, taking a monster step with his front foot, and this completely destroys his follow-through. Since his feet are so wide, he then can't swing his hips through the throw, and this ends up forcing him to mostly use his arm. That's why his passes end up so far behind his target. This is also another reason why he ends up sailing passes too. He tries too hard to overcompensate for this issue. His interception in the end zone against the Rams is a perfect example of this. Let's look at this one closely. In the middle of the third quarter, the Rams were playing with 2 safeties deep. They were actually in cover 1 robber. The robber safety was cutting off the tight end looking for an interception. Seeing what coverage the Rams were playing post-snap, this told Wentz to look at his matchups. He had a one-on-one on the outside on the right with a cornerback and off-man coverage. Meanwhile, the deep safety was sitting at the left hash marks, which is what opened the window for this throw. If Wentz was able to rip it accurately and with enough velocity, this could have been a touchdown. That's unfortunately not what happened here. After executing play action, Wentz identified the matchup we just talked about. He saw that his receiver had inside leverage after his break. He looked to throw the ball aggressively into that window. This is the right decision. However, what he did with his footwork is exactly why this became a pick. I paused the game film right here to show you just how far his feet are spread apart. As soon as he took that monster step we talked about, this is what caused that issue. His front foot is now pigeon-toeing while he locked out his knee, and there is 0% chance that he can then bring his hip through the throw. His weight is still on his back foot, and the ball is being completely powered by his arm. This is why his pass is behind his target. All the cornerback has to do now is undercut the route, and he brought it in for the interception. Now, this issue that I just pointed out obviously doesn't happen all the time. It's not like every single throw that I've shown you in this breakdown that this was the major issue. However, this tendency to overstride and lock out his knee is a big reason why his accuracy is so inconsistent. This was also an issue that Wentz had earlier in his career. It's like he completely forgot all the training mechanics he's been practicing. He reverted back to what he was doing in college. So, if you ask me the question, is this fixable? My honest answer is yes, Wentz can definitely fix this. However, the point I'm going to make is that I already thought he fixed it. I already thought we went through this when he came out of college, but we're still seeing it in his 5th season. This is what really bothers me. When things break down, and since the NFL is such an unforgiving league, these issues simply get magnified. Now, the thing about Wentz, and this has been true of him since he entered the NFL, is that he's never been the most accurate passer. He's always been good to okay in terms of pure accuracy, but he's never been elite. I would never put him in the tier of guys like Russell Wilson or Drew Brees or even a quarterback like Kirk Cousins. He's never had that ability. While this may be the case, good to okay is still typically fine. You can still win a ton of games exactly like he has. His IQ, his playmaking abilities to break tackles and create big throws, all combined in an awesome offense, has worked so well over the past few years. This is just not the case this season. So far, Wentz is the main reason why this team is being held back. His accuracy is literally bottom tier if you look at any advanced stat. For example, if you look at the NFL's next-gen accuracy metrics and their stat on completion percentage over expectation, Wentz is currently 33rd out of 35 eligible quarterbacks. They claim he should have completed 63% of his throws. Instead, Wentz is only at 55. Now, as I've already talked about in previous videos, drops aren't accounted for in this metric. I know a lot of people think that drops are a huge problem for this offense. They also argue that since the receivers are terrible at separating, this is the reason why he can't complete any throws. While this certainly does factor into the situation, drops aren't as big of a problem as people make them out to be. If you look at Pro Football Focus's adjusted completion percentage, which removes things like drops, throwaways, being hit while thrown, and batted passes, Wentz is currently 30th out of the same 35 quarterbacks. This is really bad. This team, while their wide receivers are definitely struggling to separate, aren't dropping the ball nearly as much as we think. Outside of drops, the other common argument I keep hearing about the Eagles' offense has to do with the injuries to their offensive line. This team has been decimated by injuries. They lost Brandon Brooks, who's one of the best guards in the entire NFL, and they also lost Andre Dillard, who was supposed to take a big step this season. Even a guy like Lane Johnson, who's one of the best offensive tackles in the NFL, has been nicked up since the start of the year. While again, this does factor in, the advanced stats tell a very different story. The Eagles' offensive line is still average at the very worst. If you look at ESPN's pass blocking win rate, the Eagles are 5th overall in that metric. Meanwhile, according to Pro Football Focus and their stat on pass blocking efficiency, they are 17th in their metric. To say that they are complete trash and terrible this season is completely wrong. Yes, they had an awful game against Washington in Week 1, but they aren't as bad as we think. The truth is that they just aren't as good as what Wentz is used to having. Now, the one thing I do want to bring up is that it's unfair to say that Wentz has been nothing but terrible this season. Yes, I'll argue that he's held the team back, and he's been pretty awful leading the entire NFL in turnover-worthy plays, but he still does flash the occasional amazing throw. If you're an Eagles fan, this is the silver lining in this breakdown. For example, on this touchdown against the Bengals, I saw the old Wentz of years past. I saw a player that was decisive, I saw a player that was accurate, and I saw a player that clearly had command and trust of his offense. How he quickly went from identifying a disguised coverage pre-snap to making a throw post-snap is really awesome to see. I loved what I saw in this one. Let me show you how he exactly did this. Before the snap, the Bengals were lining up with a safety deep over the middle of the field while the slot defender followed the Eagles receiver back and forth on his motion. The Eagles were attempting to use this as a coverage indicator on the play. Similar to that check down to the running back that I talked about earlier, this was once again a zone coverage defense disguised to look like they were playing man. On this one, they're actually dropping to Tampa 2. Now normally against Tampa 2, the deep third safeties would drop closer to the sideline. However, with the slot receiver attacking the numbers and with the safety being late to recognize the route combination, this opened the window for the throw. As soon as the ball was snapped, he saw that the safeties were dropping into a middle of the field open coverage. This is an instant tell to check the fade route and the out route run on the right side. If neither of these players were open, Wentz would then find his tight end underneath. Look closely at what happened here. Wentz saw that the outside cornerback didn't sync with his receiver, so Wentz aggressively fired his pass up the sideline. He ripped it to Ward almost instantly after realizing what was happening. This was an awesome throw. It shows decisiveness, it shows accuracy, and Ward was able to bring it in for the 29-yard touchdown. This play right here is what gives me hope for Wentz. It's a play that I've seen him do 1,000 times against every single team in the NFL. So it's clear that he hasn't suddenly lost his ability. While this may be the case, what I think he has lost is trust in his offense. He lost trust in the fact that his offensive line isn't top 5 anymore. He lost trust that his wide receivers can consistently win one-on-one against their opponents. And finally, he's lost trust in his own throwing mechanics where he's reverted back to his old habits. It almost feels like he's playing not to lose, which is just a huge problem on its own. The question we have to ask if Wentz can fix these issues. Should the Eagles just bench him for the time being, and should they start Jalen Hurts instead, or should they let him figure it out? The way I see it is that you have to keep giving Wentz chances to make up for these mistakes. I'm really hoping that he works on these issues. But the unfortunate problem is that the Eagles' schedule is only going to get harder. They play the 49ers this weekend, they then fly to Pittsburgh the following, and the third game in this brutal stretch is the Baltimore Ravens. There is a decent chance that they end up going 0-3 in the stretch. This is a really hard schedule where combined together the Eagles' opponents are 7-2. If the Eagles don't win one of these games, and if Wentz doesn't drastically improve like I know he can, then it's probably time that the Eagles test out their rookie. Well, that's all I have for you in this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure you subscribe to my channel. I'll have a new one out for you next week, so definitely keep an eye out for that one. Until next time, take care of yourself, and you can follow me on Twitter at Samuel R. Gold.